There is a fifth dimension.
A dimension of sound.
Damn it, Frank! We tell him to be quiet. I spilled my hot cup of Uranus again.
A dimension of sight.
Hey, Arch. I'm gonna sock you in the puss.
A dimension of mind.
Man, Adams, is that you?
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Alright, you guys ready to get started?
Let's do it.
I'm ready.
Do we really want to talk about this episode?
Only because I don't have a career to get canceled from.
Let's do it. Let's talk about the Fifth Dimension of Twilight Zone podcast. I am your host, Nick. We are here to talk another episode of the Twilight Zone. We're back to talk one of the most controversial episodes ever on the Twilight Zone. Probably one of the most why did I watch this episode type of episodes. And yeah, we'll talk about it. So Triv, Jacob, how the hell are you guys? You good?
Not as violated as Jake is.
Yeah, no
It was
Q-tips.
years ago, but I still remember it.
I'm sure.
We'll leave it at that. We're not going to have any...
Jake had an encounter of his own, but we're not talking about that.
That was my first
Right.
wife I was talking about, by the way. So I don't know.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Not the current one. It just kind of like dawned
No,
on me.
that's
Anyway,
fair. That's fair.
Hey, I had a...
/ viewers are like, what?
That
Exactly.
was 5 kids ago.
4.
He's like, yep.
4.
4 years ago.
Yeah.
Anyways, we're back. We're here. Raymond, who is I think I can see what Raymond's doing. There he goes. He's coming back into focus.
Woohoo!
Stay on focus. Stay on focus.
Oh, I just knocked my keyboard over.
You can't watch any Hawk and Slayer or whatever you're watching.
Hawk the
was it you
Slayer.
watched?
Slayer.
Hawk
Oh, Hawk.
Yeah, Hawk to a
Hawk to a
Slayer.
Slayer.
If you try to Google Hawk the Slayer, you just get Hawk to a Girl videos
Oh, I bet.
nonstop. It is impossible to find anybody other than someone also named Ray that talked about. If you put in Hawk the Slayer, you get me and you get a old man puppet called Ray Reviews talking about this fucking movie.
I was gonna say I should be coming up with that because I did a review or a riff on it as well. So
You might have.
Yay.
So Hawk to a Slayer and puppet named Hawk Slayer. Gotcha.
Yeah.
we'll go with that.
Well, welcome back, Raymond. How you doing, man?
I'm actually doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Getting more hours at work. Nobody
Running
at
out
work
of food?
hates me right now. We
Yay.
ran out of eggs on Sunday because we changed owners since the last time we talked, and the new owner can't afford eggs. So that's great.
I'm not sure anybody can
There you
afford
go.
eggs right now.
I can.
Yeah, well, that's true.
I got chickens.
I mean, for
Go
$6
steal
a dozen,
one
I
of your
mean,
fucking chickens, Jacob.
Well, there you go. You
So is
guys
this
should
like-
connect. That way your bar can get eggs from Jake.
yeah, Jake, you can start your own egg farm with your GoPro camera.
Yeah,
if you
I
watch
can.
you,
I'll get some more
Yeah.
chickens. I'm gonna track
Exactly.
supply and get some chicks. Like chickens, not just chicks. I
just
don't
make
know
sure you
how
don't eat the eggs and
chicks.
just let them hatch.
baby.
You have
Yeah,
plenty
you
of
can track
chickens.
the
If
supply.
no one's figured it out yet, Nick is stalling because he hates this episode.
Really?
It's
Wait, what?
a complex
happened?
episode.
I said Nick hates this episode. That's why he's stalling.
Oh, I think you said I was stolen. I'm like,
Stalling.
stolen. What was I doing? I'm not stalling. I'm asking
Or
everyone's doing.
Stalin. Could be Stalin too.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it could be.
Place like he's Stalin, we're like oppressed.
All right, right. Now you just
Fascist.
gotta be like the Kingsman and dance like Rasputin,
Do it.
right?
Hooray!
Guys, let's talk about it. We're gonna talk about the episode that is considered the most controversial episode of the Twilight Zone.
Really?
It's an episode. Yeah, it really is.
Banned for
Um,
50 years.
Like
Yeah.
seriously?
Yeah,
This is the
it
most
didn't come
controversial-
back till it didn't come
Since
back till
when?
2016.
Okay, and the
Is
Is
reason
it
it-
controversial nowadays or back then?
back then. Let's see. So this episode sparked some controversy for CBS when it first aired in 1964 due to strong critical blowback from its overt racism and revisionist history. The episode was pulled out of syndication and wasn't rebroadcast until 2016, although it did air in other countries throughout that time. It triggered audiences and reviewer criticism of the episode as antithetical to the series' normally positive treatment of an otherwise sensitive social, religious, or radical or racial subject matter. Essentially, what the episode implied was that Arthur's dad, along with other Japanese Americans, guided Japanese bombers towards the ships in Pearl Harbor, which isn't something that happened in the actual event or during the actual day. So that whole bit, being that it kind of put Japanese Americans in a bad light, that's what got the episode banned for so long.
I mean,
I mean,
did it put Japanese Americans in a bad light or just his dad?
Well, it was implied that I'm just going by what it's saying here. My assumption is that if it said that, it was thought of, okay, well then it's a thing that happened. You know, because sometimes people will be like, oh, there's this thing, but it wasn't a thing that actually happened.
I
And you're
mean,
talking something that was 20 years after it
Just because
happened.
this one dude did it doesn't mean all of them did. I don't know.
No, I agree.
well, it'd be like if you had somebody from over in the Middle East and you had an American. We were talking about 9/11, how the it's the same thing. It's like how it's of the time, it's viewing of the time. But let me introduce the actual episode first before we continue. The episode is season 5, episode 31, called The Encounter, directed by Robert Butler, written by Martin M. Smith, production code 2640, air date May 1st, 1964. Stars Neville Brand and oh my, George Takei.
Oh, my.
Nice.
Oh my.
Oh my.
So yeah, George Takei of famous Star Trek and the oh my line, but
He usually fences, but this time he's got a samurai sword.
right.
Absolutely. There is one other factor that contributed to that whole thing. It was the fact that it was U.S. was preparing to enter the Vietnam War, which compounded all of this stuff and probably made people more aware or more sensitive to all of that. So,
and it's always a thing where, like, I know in the episodes they say it was one of them, not all of them, but that's not how America works. It's all
that's
of
not
them.
how anybody. Like that's not
And
how.
that's not how
person-
brains work. You blame everybody, and you shouldn't, but you do. Or
I blame all you
did,
guys
or
for
whatever.
every week. No, I'm just.
I don't blame you. I mean, any episode that I hosted, I can guarantee you, I would blame me for those two.
If it wasn't for us, Nick would have been asleep an hour ago.
No, if it weren't for you guys, I probably would have no power again, as usual. Okay, so
we are focused as fuck tonight, people.
no, we're all focused. Raymond's like, he needs his camera needs glasses apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta get prescription glasses for your camera there.
Let's see if
I'm just messing with you,
trick it.
Raymond. It's all good. I'm
Trick
just
it
messing with you.
into seeing me better. Like I said, I tried to get a new camera, and the only ones they had were cheap crap, and shit my cheap crap computer can't run. So
I mean, I have a Logitech one that like doesn't work very well either, so don't feel bad. I need an actual camera.
My Logitech broke.
After all that great information from Trev that we clearly didn't hear just like 20 minutes ago because we've been having problems.
For the 8th time.
The encounter is one of those episodes that I feel is more just not that great, and as Triv has alluded to, and before we recorded, very confusing sometimes on what it's trying to do, and what it's trying to say, and I just don't think this is a very good episode. And I think the overt racial overtones is something that it's the 60s. Like that's just what they dealt with. It wasn't a perfect, we're kind of in that state of flux right now with the racial overtones and the trying to reconfigure history for no fucking reason. And this episode's problem is it's just not very interesting and kind of ends on a, I don't know if you guys agree, but ends on a weird fucking note. I can see why it's not highly regarded. It's just not to me, it's just not a very good episode. I think, Neville Brand, George Takei do the best with what they can with the script, but it clearly is overwrought. It clearly is trying to say something, but it clearly just doesn't know what it wants to say. And when it does try to say something, it's like, oh no, here's a haunted samurai sword or haunted katana. It's like, okay, I don't know. Help me out, guys. Like Raymond, I'll start with you. Like, what do you think about this episode before we get into it?
I think if I had a career I could be canceled from, I wouldn't be doing this episode.
Yeah.
No, but if, like you said with the ending, man, if it wasn't racist before, the ending is just like, let's be racist.
Yeah, it's
Like we
having
talk
yeah.
about on the show a lot about a bad guy getting what's coming to him. And there's a lot of Twilight Zone episodes that do that. And sometimes it's boring because it's like bad, 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 and then 2 seconds of them getting what's coming to him. But in this case, the bad guy is an inanimate object. And I don't know if either of these people were bad people or whether it's just a product of their time or whether they're manipulated. Because we see very early the white soldier guy's like, ah, shit, the sword again. That's going to turn me racist. And the Japanese guys grab the sword like, I must kill Whitey. The second he grabs the sword. So the bad guy is an inanimate object that we learn can't be destroyed, given away, sold, lost, anything. So there's never going to be any redemption arc. There's never going to be any comeuppance. There's never going to be anything.
And, like no, there's no arc in general. By the way, I'm sorry, Raymond, you have to come on these episodes, but you clearly like these really bad episodes, so you're welcome. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. What do you guys think? Triv, Jacob, anybody want to talk?
I mean, we kind of
Uh,
talked about this when you and I watched this, and I walk
uh,
away more confused than anything with this. Like, it's such a with Marshall specifically, there's so much back and forth on, he's lonely. He's, says, "Oh, hey, stop in for a beer. I could use help." Goes over to talking about, hunting down Japanese people during World War II, which obviously that really wasn't that far removed. And then he goes into, how, kind of the immigrant thing, and then he goes back to talking to this guy that he just met about, the fact that he lost his job, and then it goes to this and that. There's no It's such an all over the place thing, and I guess I don't
there's like no
understand.
structure to the
I
screenplay,
don't
maybe, I
understand
guess.
what the overall, because most of these, even if they're a little bit like something like The Trouble with Templeton, there is a story, like you get the idea of what they're trying to say. And I don't know with this one, and maybe I could just be a dumbass, which is entirely possible. I don't understand outside of to try and say, okay, there was a lot of damage done on both sides. Maybe I don't like you could go the haunted sword route, I suppose, but I don't get the what the episode is aiming for.
I had the same feeling like, who are we supposed to be rooting for or against? Because right away, George Takei's character is like, I'm going to kill this white guy because he was in the military. And the military guy, he's like, oh, I'm sorry, that's just the way I speak. Oh, I apologize. So are we supposed to like think he's a bad guy? Are we supposed to think Takei's a bad guy? Like the episode seems very confused, like you said, about what its message is, other than like this sword bring the magical sword made him call a Japanese guy boy. Like, is that the message?
Yeah, yeah, Jacob. I mean, I'm not like, I just don't know what to say because it's just like this guy Fenton, who's played by Neville Brand, he's upset, he's happy, he's upset, he's happy. He's like Jacob's camera is so confused about what he wants to do. I don't know.
Also,
So
Even
I
the
Jacob,
beers
apologize.
are confused. He keeps opening the beer from the wrong side because at this point in the series, they didn't fucking give a shit. They're drinking from the bottom of beers at one point. Nobody
so this is
cares.
ranking 156 in your book. You opened the real beer in the wrong place. Fuck you, 156.
156, you don't know how to drink a beer.
Also, I apologize. I called the guy Marshall. I forgot what his name was. It's obviously Fenton, so apologies on that.
Call him Katana.
No,
he-
I'm not doing that. Well, and that's the thing. Like, you get that from both sides, and I don't know. Like, if they're saying that the sword is reliving that final moment, because you get George Takei going on to this guy about how I know you killed, the soldier whose sword this was in cold blood. He didn't, he surrendered to you, and you killed him outright. I mean, I that whole line, like there was no explanation as to how he knew that. If the sword told him, which I suppose you can kind of say, and I don't have any background for this episode either. It's the first time I've watched it, so I don't know. I guess I said it before, but I'll say it again. I was left just kind of confused.
Okay.
Lay it on us, brother.
So, um,
No, you got to do it, Jacob. You got to go. Do.
For the one other person that listens on podcast version instead of YouTube, Jacob was dancing.
yeah. Okay, so I wasn't really confused by the
Cool.
episode. Maybe I got it all wrong. But the way that I took it, okay, so it was multi-layered, multifaceted.
Like a parfait.
Yeah, like an onion.
Like an onion.
Nice.
So you got the sword part, and then you got the two men part. The sword part's whatever, supernatural or something like that, and its influence and yada yada yada. Okay, whatever. That's the Twilight Zoney part. The part that I found more interesting was the thing about the two men and what I felt like the episode was trying to do, with the assistance of the sword, enlightening them on some things like the fact that he killed the officer in cold blood, and it influenced the George Takei's character to tell him about his father. I feel like there isn't. That's the point of it. There's not a bad guy. It's not that black and white, just like real life. Well, usually in real life, everyone has layers, and the military guy, he's not necessarily a de facto bad guy. He's done some bad
Right.
things. He does some bad things, but he has a good part to him as well. Even at one part, he says, "I'm not a bad guy," and I think he believes that. I think he probably isn't a terrible person.
Oh yeah.
George Takei, but we are now we're led to believe in the beginning of the episode because of his speech and his gruffness that he is more the aggressor and he is more the he's very passive aggressive, well, kind of passive aggressive, sometimes just straight up aggressive in his language. But let's talk about that aspect. His as we framed it as some of the racist side of things. I mean, is it? Yeah, yeah, it is. But it's kind of like I'm not validating it. I mean, they're actors, it's a story. But I'm not validating that type of behavior from people from then. But at the same time, that is just how some people were that went to, and the reason I think is because they went to a war that we call the Great War, but I don't think there's anything great about it, where they were fighting for years in these awful circumstances against these people. Now, while you shouldn't judge a complete, all people by one, like what a few do, I mean, it is what it is. These people were fighting the Japanese in this case, like in bloody, violent, hand-to-hand, face-to-face combat, and saw these awful atrocities. So, he probably does have a view of those types of people or types of Japanese people. Right or wrong, that's just one of the horrors of war. That's what it does. People take stuff back with them.
Yeah.
So you hear that a lot from people that went to wars. They usually have a bit, especially these long drawn out wars like that. They have, if it's usually with a foreign country, they have, well, it's always with a foreign country. They have their own views on those people and prejudices. And I think that it's probably rooted in the fact that they were fighting these people for their lives in bloody, god awful atrocities. So while I don't agree with it, I can at least understand it. I can understand why someone would possibly be that way. Didn't say it was right. It's kind of like with the whole thing with Thanos, to bring it up to normal days, that's why he was an interesting character, because while you don't agree with what he's doing, you understand it. You're like, I mean, I get where he's coming from. I don't agree with it, but I get where he's coming from. That's what I mean. But at the same time, he's like, hey man, come up here and let's just talk. Come have a beer. Come hang out. So it's not like he's just like filled with hate towards these people and this man, because it is obvious when George Takei walks in, he's Japanese or at least Asian, and so it's not like he's just like, oh, I hate all of you. He's just, he's got some views and because of his past traumas. So I mean, he's not a terrible person. He's done some terrible things. And as George Takei, he comes across as just like the really nice guy who's, being oppressed by this other man. But we find out later on, maybe everything he says, his perfect squeaky clean little life, isn't exactly that. Because he's like, oh, I come from an upstanding family and this and that, yada yada. Then we find out, well, he didn't do it, but your father did kind of, regardless of revisionist history and all that. Within this story, your father did he did some things, and you know about that. So I
He
mean,
immediately like changes the story too. He starts off
well,
saying my father built the docks and he was protecting and he should be recognized as a war hero for
yeah,
America. And now that's all bullshit. My father was a traitor and he was waving in flags to the Japanese and he's the reason why
well, there's a reason for that.
why you died. Like he like
There's a reason. There's a reason. But yeah, it is a quick turnaround, but
Yeah, therein lies the thing.
they had a limited amount of time. They want to get to the point, and I think that's what were they 100% successful at it. I mean, I guess that's how I took it. That it is just trying to show two people and how it's not black and white. That good, evil, bad, good. It's just everybody's got a little bit of both in them. And then you throw the thing with the sword in there, and like a vengeful sword, whether it's, was it a possessed sword or what, I don't know, but whatever, all that. Um,
I
I was
I
o-
almost feel like. Go ahead, I'm sorry. I'm gonna
I
cut
was
you
just
off.
gonna say I was okay with all that. I enjoyed the even though it could have been better, but I mean I enjoyed the back and forth and of the two men in the story about them about how neither of them I didn't view either of them as like just a terrible person. I viewed both of them of having their faults. Um, maybe one more than the other. That's not what it was about. It was about just, it's not black and white. And I think that that's what the episode was trying to do, was not frame one of them or the other a total bad light. I think it was supposed to be a gray area.
Do you think this episode would have worked better if, like, let's say these two individuals meet in present day and somehow they get transported back to the war and they find themselves like against each other and maybe they see the differences? Like, it almost feels like they're both being punished for something that they can't control more than anything would have worked. I'm just kind of curious about that.
I I think that that would have worked, but I don't think that would have been the same story. I don't think that's
Well,
the story.
no, but like, do you think?
I
I
get
don't
what you're
know. I
saying. I think
just,
that would have been interesting
yeah.
too. Because I mean, we've seen stories
I
like that
do have a
before.
question for you, Jacob. When Benton invites George Takei up to his apartment, did he have ill intentions then? He had touched the sword, or did he just want a guy to help him clean the attic out?
I don't think so. I think he was lonely. He even says at one point, I think he's just a lonely guy who probably came back from the war
Realizes his wife's
and
about to leave him.
has been drinking himself into a stupor because, and it probably within the simplified context of the story, all stems from the bad things he did in the war, like killing this man in cold blood. So it's kind of like that's followed him. The sword and the idea behind that and the things he did has haunted him since he got back. So he's been just kind of miserable and lonely. And even though he has a view of like, say, Japanese people, even at this point, he's just like, I'm so lonely, I don't care. And he's just kind of over all that.
He does tell George Takei like anything you want, just throw on the ground. He just kind of doesn't want the company. I guess you're right.
Yeah,
But
he just
he's
wants somebody to
like
hang out with.
you'll make a fortune coming up here. Just grab my antiques. I don't care.
Yeah,
Well, I
come
think
hang
too
out.
he talked
Have a drink.
about like the fact that his wife left him, he got left off from his job. I mean, the guy is at a low point anyway for that respect.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So
we
that in
learn
mind,
later that he's going through a time.
I think it's also about masks that we wear, like when we're talking to people, because when they first start telling each other things, it's never the full truth, which that's life. I mean, you don't. I mean, some people do. You have those people that unload everything on you as soon as they meet, and you're like, "Whoa, too much." But most of us, we'll like meet people for the first time and like we give a little bit of ourselves. And then as we get to know each other, we give more and more and more. And they learn more about us and more personal stories. But this was, an abbreviated version of that. Like he came in and he said, yeah, my wife's out of town. And then it's, oh, well, she's been real unhappy with me all over my ass. And then it's not her ass left. She left me. She's gone. So he kind of like, I feel, and the same with George Takei. He was like, I'm just a gardener. And then like, it just kind of, they unloaded their stories developed over time and they told more and more and more. I mean, usually this would take more than just one meeting, but we did have a supernatural samurai jack sword there. So
Yeah, no doubt.
George Takei is
Like
like,
24
oh,
minutes.
I'm from
Yeah,
America.
exactly.
My name's Arthur. Well, no, it's not. Well, I don't know Japanese. Well, I actually do. Well, and
Yeah.
he just keeps changing.
I think
And
too, he
I
was
think the
probably
sword
didn't.
was influencing them to move things along faster.
I would say too that like because of the intern camps and all that kind of stuff, the like with Germans after World War II, like you tamper down those like not like the ethnic things that you're coming from. So you tamper down on the Japanese, you tamper down on the German, you tamper down on Italian, possibly, to kind of embrace the American side. So he probably like you talked about, Jake. He talked about putting on a mask. He, even though he might have known Japanese as a kid or continued, talked about it with certain members of his family, he may not have embraced that side of himself or put it aside because to embrace that side of yourself could get you in real trouble.
Yeah, and coming off of a war, I mean, this would have been 1964, so you're talking just 20 years after
Yeah.
the Great War or the Second Great War, and his people were one of two major aggressors in the world, and did kill a lot of Americans, and we killed a lot of them. It was a lot of killing,
Yeah.
a lot of feelings. So he's probably trying to distance himself as much as possible from that heritage. While I get the feeling like he didn't want to like totally just disown it and act as though, oh no, I'm not Japanese, but he was just trying to be like, I am, but I'm really American too. And so, if I'm American, I wouldn't know how to speak that. I've been here all my life.
And it was true. He was from Hawaii and everything, so there was that, but
Yeah. Well, and
And you guys
I
are
mean,
making this episode make more sense than the episode is making itself make make sense.
Well,
It's
that- I mean,
so weird.
but
Like,
think about it, that's
like Raymond's
always
bringing
how
up
we
good
roll.
point. Everybody's bringing up good points. It's like
I took all that
Uh,
from the episode. No shit. I mean, I did get because like
Yeah.
I was listening to you guys talk about it, and I was like, man, they really hate this episode. I didn't really think it was that bad.
I didn't
Now, I
hate
mean,
it. I just was confused.
I have issues with it. I think it
I
not
just
goes
don't think
off
it
the
needs a
rails
magical sword. It's like the sword in the
exactly
stone. It's like, why
I'm-
does it need that?
Because
because
it's a
the
Twilight Zone.
Bam.
Yeah,
Jeez.
but we had,
Yeah, exactly.
Raymond, I'm sure you watched, do you watch the Jeopardy Room, right?
Yeah.
It's the same shit. It's like, sometimes it just doesn't need a magical element to get its Twilight Zone point across.
It really
and-
didn't.
In the Jeopardy
Yeah. I
think the
Room is an
same thing
episode
could have
that
happened
I went
without
into rewatching only knowing the ending. I know that the henchman is going to stupidly pick up the phone, and that's what they're trying to trick this guy into doing the entire time. And this episode's kind of like that, like, I guess the sword is the observer. Like, come on, guys, fight, 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 fight. And the sword is trying to get them. And this guy Fenton is like, oh, but I just call people boy. Like, I just call people by the wrong name. Like, I'm not trying to be evil. Like, he doesn't understand that he's continuing the aggravation. And
I mean,
that's
I think he did
that's
to a
part of
degree at
our
times.
confusion of who is the bad guy, because it's a guy from the 60s who fought in World War II, and he doesn't, and as he says in his own words, we were taught you weren't people. Like, he doesn't see himself as a bad guy. He doesn't see an aggravation in here. He's mad his wife left him. He just wants to have a beer. He just wants some conversation. And he doesn't and it's this fucking magical sword making him racist, basically, and it's so weird.
And honestly, I don't think I'd have a problem with just the sword, but it affecting like the door. And I don't know how you would play that to keep them in that space without something to, some door to shut or whatever. But that part of it kind of got a little bit weird to me. Like,
Yeah.
leave it at every time I've tried to give this sword away, it kept coming back, and let that be where it starts and stops for this thing. Like it's clearly sticking around for some purpose.
Its physical manifestations
Right.
was a bit too far. Like the
He
door thing
literally
didn't
says at
need to
one
happen.
point that
Yeah.
the garbage men came, knocked on his door, and said, "Did you mean to throw this away?"
I mean,
And gave him the sword back.
when he went to leave, he could have just stopped and been like, "Wait, wait, wait, come on, don't go, don't go, don't go," and
Like
like show him hesitate, and he would be like,
Yeah.
"Come back, please." All right, my bad. Sorry, come on back. I mean, you didn't need the door to like keep them in there because when they get
It
heated, they
felt
would.
cheesy.
Yeah, the door didn't.
Like,
That whole thing didn't need to happen. You didn't need him. I didn't mind him like holding the sword at the beginning, kind of like being mesmerized by it, and then that like kind of leaves it a bit ambiguous. What he's sitting there like the sword's talking to him, like I'm going to kill him. What the fuck? Just I don't think you needed all that. The
Yeah,
supernatural
that
sword
instant
thing.
scene was a little too much where he just grabs the sword and says, "I'm gonna become a murderer because sword." Like you could have tampered that scene a little bit.
And I
Yeah.
will agree with, and I some of the stuff that the trivia was talking about with the reason the episode was banned. I I lost my train of thought. Shit.
yeah, go ahead.
Crap. I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
can't remember. I apologize.
No,
Well,
it's fine. It's fine.
basically what I was gonna say was like the fact that this. I remember now. So the fact that it talks about like vengeance against these two, random guys that just happen to be in the same place for obvious reasons. It and both of them at the end, it doesn't end good for anybody. And I mean, that's really not a Twilight Zone thing. Like there's only two or three people that have really gotten like severe comeuppance that, didn't deserve it. And, or they get, if you get your comeuppance, it's because you've done something stupid. This, it's just, these two guys, they're just, one was a soldier, one was a kid during Pearl Harbor. There's no, they didn't kick puppies and curb stomp babies,
That's
I
the
don't know.
point.
Yeah, like but
There's
yeah,
not an evil here. It's
right.
just
But
two people.
the sword was like it represented vengeance, and that just it's not what the Twilight Zone does. Neither one of those guys deserve the fate that they got.
No, and I
Um,
mean, yes, they've done bad things. Wars. The guy did bad things in war. I mean, that doesn't absolvify you of everything, but I mean, terrible things happen in war. It is what it is. It's unfortunate, but it happens. And I don't think either of them are squeaky clean, and
Well,
that
no,
was what I took as the
no one
point of the whole thing.
is.
But that is why the sword, the heavy supernatural overtones of the sword, that is the part that I didn't like. I didn't mind the sword being because I feel like the sword could have been still a part of it, more or less the way it is, just not with the supernatural. The sword existing, being there, could have brought up the conversations that bring these things to light, that the emotions make the same things happen. I mean, they could have both died in the end, or at least the one guy could have died. They could have, I mean, it could have come out that he killed the guy while they're confessing everything the way they are. That hey, I killed him in cold blood and da 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 da. It wasn't that. That could have been. That would have been much more interesting, rather than him just knowing because the magic sword told him. If like they got heated and then because he's so fucked up in his head with the wife left and he's just miserable that at one point maybe he'd been telling the story that oh no, I took it from an officer that was trying to kill me. Then he just breaks down and he's like, he wasn't trying to kill me. He actually surrendered
Yeah.
and I
yeah,
shot him.
I agree
And
with
he's
you
just
on
stayed
that,
with me all
Jake.
these years.
And I think George Takei gets to tell the story because he's the one touching the sword. But if they had basically kind of passed the sword back and forth as like a lie detector test,
Like the magic rod.
almost,
Right.
and he had said, like George Takei said, like my dad was defending, blah, 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 shooting at the troops as they came in, blah, blah, blah. And then, no, that's not what happened. My dad was actually an asshole. If
Right.
Fenn had done that and said, I was under attack and no, he was actually harmless and I killed him for no reason.
Yeah, and
If
that could
they
have
had
still
done
worked.
that, like Takei did, if they had just passed the story back and forth, instead of Takei doing both stories, let Fenton tell his story, I'm totally on board with you on that. That would have been a better way to tell the story than the way
Yeah,
they
and
did.
he could have, he could have just, he could have even been trying to make excuses at the time and been like, it was war, we were scared, I didn't know what to do, and I took and him showing remorse, showing that it's followed him through life, and that's why one of the reasons he's so miserable. And then have George Takei's character, not accept that and be like, you are a murderer, you did this, that, and blah blah blah, and not be accepting of it. And then that's where conflict comes and it escalates, and yeah, somebody dies. However, I do want to touch on the very, very end. I know we're not quite there, but one of my
Well, yeah, before we do that, Raymond, what are we supposed to do?
oh,
Now that I've forgotten.
At
Damn
some
it, Raymond, I get
point
mad at you for no
during this
reason.
episode, our good friend, Mr. Jacob Anders, not his real name, is supposed to introduce us to the episode through the voice of Mr. Rod Serling and tell us what happens in the beginning of the episode. Who are these people and what is going on? And I'm talking long enough
I was
so
gonna
that
say, man,
Jacob
you're damn
can
near
pull up the
doing your own
Wikipedia
or your own
page.
thing,
I
man.
am talking long enough so that my friend Jacob can pull up the Wikipedia page and find the open narration
I
tab.
always have it ready.
That's
I
what
know
she
you
said.
do, but just in case.
Two men alone in an attic. That's all I did was read the.
Oh man.
Okay, let's do this for real. Let's get
Jake,
serious here, people.
Jake, you're the superhero we need more than the superhero we
But
deserve.
not the villain we do. That we have.
All right.
Shit.
Two men in an attic, a young Japanese American, and a seasoned veteran of yesterday's war. It's 20 odd years since Pearl Harbor, but two ancient opponents are moving into position for a battle in an attic crammed with skeletons, souvenir mementos, old uniforms, and rusted metals. Ghosts from the dim reaches of the past that will lead us into the Twilight Zone.
Jacob,
That
if
was
I didn't
like
know if you were talking about the Twilight Zone, I would assume you were narrating a porn.
that
The way
was like
that
the most
sounded.
overt homoerotic opening narration we've had thus far.
I mean,
Right.
they both get pretty sweaty by the time everything is said and done.
Well, here's a question I have for you guys, Jacob. I know I cut you off and all that stuff. Would this episode have worked if the sword hadn't been haunted?
Yes,
And
better. In fact.
Mhm.
yes, he's like, yes, absolutely. No, but the sword hadn't been haunted, but the sword had been owned by his father or something like that. They killed his father. It was like one of those twist of fate type of things.
I wouldn't like that.
Uh,
That would have been
I
like
mean, I don't
Star
know. I
Wars
just
and
feel like
Thunder went together.
this, a haunted sword just doesn't
I
really
actually would have
work.
liked the idea if, like I was saying earlier, because it's my idea. If
Automatically better.
if like he did come clean about killing the Japanese soldier that way, and since they have been talking so much about Japanese American and his feelings towards them and yada yada yada, and clearly George Takei's character
This
has an
scene
issue
does
with
not look at all like a homoerotic scene where he says, I'll just take 10 minutes. That's all I need.
oh my. But
Oh
like if
my.
tensions had risen and when he finally comes clean about, yeah, I killed him in cold blood and it haunts him, and we're expecting George Takei to be like, oh, it's okay. Instead, he's like, no, I don't accept that. That's terrible. You're not a good person because you did that. And then they go back and he's like, well, who are you to talk to me about that? You're commie dad. And like they just start from there. And that's why he, just the two people having a disagreement and it escalates and that's why he kills him. I think would have been I would have thought that was far and above much better. It wouldn't have been super Twilight Zoney, I guess, but I
Yeah.
would have still liked it better. I mean, last week's episode wasn't super Twilight Zoney either, but it was still a good story. I mean, do I want
What?
a mediocre or not mediocre? Do I want a story that has a Twilight Zone element, or do I want a really interesting, intriguing story that doesn't really have a lot to do with Twilight Zone? I think I'll take the second one.
What? You don't want a guy falling off or going out the window going
Banzai!
banzai?
Okay,
I
so
was
I
like,
haven't had heavy criticism of this episode up to this point. The sword thing is kind of neither here nor there.
yeah.
That right there, though, I almost laughed. I almost busted. I was all by myself, and I was like, what? I was laughing because I was like, really, guys? I mean, really? You said, okay, how are we going to end it? Have him jump out the fucking window. What's with windows in Twilight Zone and
Exactly.
endings? He jumps out a
I
fucking
mean,
window and goes bonsai. I mean, what the fuck was that? Was he possessed? Was he just overwrought with grief? I feel like there's a better way he could have gone out.
I just assumed that he wanted to get onto the game show Bonsai.
I mean, and how far
maybe you
up
need
is
the
he? I
wheel
mean,
fish or
it's
something. I
what,
don't know.
the second floor of a house or something? You jump out
Second
the
or
window.
third floor, depending. I mean, the house looked like it was pretty big, so I'd say at least, well, no, at least 2 stories up or 3 stories up because you
I
had two
mean,
staircases.
Chances
if a
are it
guy,
didn't kill him. I mean, there's a good chance he survived that fall.
I mean, it
Probably.
depends on how he fell out. Like he did jump through the window head first, so
Yeah, he jumped out kind of like cannonball. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Banzai! Maybe he landed on the sword.
I mean, that would have made more sense, but I don't know. I feel like there's so much potential with what they're trying to say and how, you know, our like the what we do and how what we say and how we say it and how we act affects everyone.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's so weird. Oh, Raymond, while you were gone, we were talking about George Takei jumping out the window going bonsai. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't know how you feel
it
about that.
ends with like if you like I said earlier, if the episode wasn't racist before it is now.
Yeah.
Like it's just like why? Why is that decision you make that you end it with a suicide bomber? Like
Well, but but in all honesty though, I mean not to joke, but isn't that what Japanese soldiers did? Honorably committed suicide.
Kamikaze.
They
Yeah.
yeah,
oh my God.
kamikaze or with the sword. I mean,
And
it
Kamikaze
just
pilots were a thing at Pearl Harbor too. So
Yeah.
yeah. I'm just saying in general, like I know that's a warrior thing. It's like it almost feels like
I thought they yelled
they're
banzai.
trying to cop out. What's that?
I'm
I don't
not
know if
sure
they
about
yelled
that.
banzai.
I know like if you're talking God, I can't tell you if it was samurai or one of the noble like the ranks of Japanese soldiers or warriors, they'd commit seppuku if they like did dishonorable things.
Like
They caused
Well, that's what
dishonor
I'm
to the
saying.
clan.
Maybe that's what they were aiming for. Like he
I think
killed
they
the guy, he fell dishonor. But it's the simple. It's not the simple fact that he jumped out the window. It's the fact that he shouted bonsai. It's like
It's kind of a
that's the
mixture of both.
problematic part. What's
It's
that?
not problematic. I mean, the comical part was kind of a mixture of the two. Put
Yeah.
them all
Like if
together.
he had just jumped out the
Banzai!
window, like he had gotten upset. He's like, I've dishonored my father and jumped out the window, or done something like that, or stabbed himself like Romeo and
Like, why
Juliet.
not fall on the sword? I mean, that's like my
I don't know. It's one of
Earlier
those
in
things
the
where
episode, Fenton had told this guy like where he now early in like the sword disappears. And he's like, how the fuck did the sword disappear? I've been trying to make this sword disappear forever. The only reason it disappeared is if you plan on killing me with it. And
yeah.
George Takei's like, what do you mean? I don't know what you're. Meanwhile, the
It disappeared
very
into your belly.
first scene we seen with George Takei is him grabbing the sword, saying, "I'm going to kill the guy with the sword." So Fenton was right, but he's also a racist. So like
I think
Jacob said he's not as confused as I am, but
that like the story that what we've said up to this point, like cutting out the supernatural aspects of the sword, I think would have been good. But when we get to the part after Fenton dies, instead of George Takei just out of nowhere being like "Banzai" and like jumping out a window, I think they could have the exact same effect, but much more effective had maybe the window been open and like been a big window or something. And he just kind of like be like overwrought with grief and just kind of like stumble over to the window, look at it, and just kind of don't jump, just kind of
Oh, kind of pull a most unusual camera.
not even that. No, not on purpose. If he just walked over there
They
and
didn't
like,
go on purpose either. They tripped over a
well, I
cord.
mean,
Yeah.
but not even by mistake. I mean, like he meant to do it. I think he could have still committed suicide, Harry Carey, whatever, but just walked over. If they want him going out this window, instead of bursting through a fucking window like he's in a Schwarzenegger '80s movie, he could have just like walked over there like somberly and just been upset that, oh my God, I just took a life, I just killed someone, and just kind of like purposely fallen out the
Well,
window and just
do you think it would have worked if it was like reverse, where he kills him and he sees the face of the guy he killed to take the sword, and then he just jumps out the window or something like that? Would that have worked better?
me
We're talking
myself
about like
personally,
switching roles.
I would have rather seen him just walk over the window somberly, just overwritten with guilt. Like after everything wears off, and he's like, "Oh shit,
Like Game of Thrones, like the kid.
killed someone." Yeah, and just kind of walk off the edge, and then like it pans away from there to the door or whatever, or just fades to black from there. I
Well,
mean,
instead we
not
get
very Twilight
him
Zone, but
literally yelling
Yeah.
fucking bonsai
better than
like a maniac.
banzai, bang out the window. I
And
mean,
then
Yeah.
earlier in the episode, the door was locked, so the sword had magically trapped these people together and uses magic powers to make them racist for some reason.
no, it
And
wasn't a magic
then
power
when
thing.
everybody's dead, the door unlocks. And it's an unlockable door. It's just a wooden door with no
Well,
locks on.
you know what needs to happen, right? The katana and the grinder monkey from the monkey need to get together because they always transport themselves into places and never leave the person they're attached to, and have an adventure.
I would have left that in, even in this
The grinder
alternate
monkey?
version. No, the alternate version we're talking about.
Oh,
With cutting out, I wouldn't say cut out, I would say cut down the supernatural, the avert supernatural elements, but even have him tell the story of like, this thing just keeps showing up. Because I mean, that could be coincidence. I would want it to be kind of like left in the air. I would want us to be asking the question, do you think it was a supernatural sword or was it just like coincidence or what? But no, we know it is. It clearly is. It's talking to people. It's
Because
telling them
it
secrets.
locks a door that
It locks
doesn't
the
have a
door.
lock on it. Like at some point
I would have left
to
the whole
trap
thing
these
about the sword
people
coming back in.
together.
Yeah,
Because I
exactly.
thought that was actually kind of interesting. I was like, okay, he's been trying to get rid of this thing for years, but he just like, it keeps on making its way back. Because shit like that does happen. There's shit that like I have that I'm like, God damn, didn't I get rid of that? I mean, that happens. It's not necessarily supernatural. It's just circumstance. That could have been an interesting little thing to make people say, what? That could have been the Twilight Zone part.
And
Was
it
it
did
supernatural?
make
Was it
sense.
not?
He talks about the trash guy bringing it back. If you're like a garbage man and someone throws away a $300
Oh, you taking it?
thing, you're like,
Exactly.
either you steal it or you're like, hey, he obviously didn't mean to throw this away, and you bring
Yeah.
it back. And like, if you're nice and not like me or Jacob, but yeah, he literally couldn't give the thing away.
I think that I did. I think it would have been much better. I've already said this. I won't say it again. I think it would have been much better if they had toned the supernatural overtones of the sword down considerably, where it wasn't overt at all. It was more of a there was an ambiguity to it all, and have the bonsai part removed and just something more thoughtful. But beyond that, even as it stands, I did appreciate the fact that they tried to. It wasn't black and white. They took two characters and subverted what we thought from the beginning they would be. And it kind of explored for a short period of time two human beings that neither is good or bad. They both have done bad things, done good things, or have skeletons in their closets, if you will. And this is where they're being aired. And I thought that was interesting. I thought that it was two flawed characters just having a conversation that have, maybe there's a bit of a rift. It gets a little
yeah,
wonky.
but not Fenton,
Arthur?
Takamori, he doesn't have he's not a bad guy. He's just a guy who touched a sword and all of a sudden gained the power of like a Japanese soldier or something like
Well,
that. It's like,
it's not really bad. It's more skeleton. I think you're right. I've been saying like they've done bad things. I think it's more
you're
that
talking
they
about his
both have
father.
skeletons in their closet, and his skeleton
Yeah.
is that he knows his dad.
It's
did this
guilt.
thing.
It's a
Yeah.
guilt thing.
They both have guilt. They're perfect. Exactly. They both have guilt that they're dealing with that they hide and don't tell anybody about and act like it's not there, and they tell a different version of stories to get by. And this is like causing this encounter is causing these things to come to light, and them having to face it, and the fallout from that. See, I like that. I mean, nobody's guilt free, nobody's perfect. Everybody tells a story of everybody tells the story they want you to how they want you to view them.
I know, Trev, you don't have an answer to this one, but you talked about it in previous episodes that towards this end, new writers didn't get they were writing Twilight Zone. Is this one of those that like they
Not that
just
I
said,
let me look quick. I didn't look in the companion. I hate to make us go longer, but let me look real quick. 2 seconds.
While you're
but
looking at
you
that,
know
I
what I
think
mean? Like this seems like they don't understand they're writing Twilight Zone like a couple of the previous episodes were. That
on
they just like if there's a twist, it counts.
on the note of George Takei not having like done anything bad, I don't think he necessarily did anything bad, but I think that he has his sin, if you will, has been that he's known that his dad did this thing, but he's been presenting his dad as some type of hero all these years, and like
I
telling everybody about
literally
how my dad was so great. He was down at the docks and he was doing this. He was a patriot, but he
I
knew, no, your dad was a traitor.
yeah,
And
today one of the podcasts I listened to was I Remember It Darker. It was a podcast about a horror story, and it came up, it was just uploaded today. And the guy said, "Oh, during the war, I went and saved these people." And like, no, I now remember my dad actually told me he saved these people by murdering unarmed guard. Like, and that you just convince yourself that what you heard was different than what it was. And it's all about this guy who the stories his dad told him about the war were all flowers and sunshine, and now he remembers that he heard it differently. And that's exactly what happened in this fucking episode. I didn't even think about it till just now.
Okay, so the guy that wrote this was Martin Goldsmith was the guy's name. He definitely wrote more than this episode. Let me look up real quick what other episodes he wrote.
Oh, it's interesting. Apparently, George Takei didn't pop up in Star Trek till like the third episode of
Well,
the
the first
series.
episode was it
like,
was a pilot, but they changed up a good chunk of the stuff.
yeah, like
Well, no,
Spock
they
ran out
consider
of
the third
motion.
episode. Yeah, they consider like the third episode the second pilot. It's really weird. I'm just reading as you guys are talking.
If you watch the original pilot with Pike, and so Kirk's not in it, it's Pike, and Spock has like emotions and stuff, and he's like on a planet looking at flowers, being like, it's really weird to see that.
Actually,
That is strange.
the first official episode was written by George Clayton Johnson.
All right,
Who
so
wrote?
Martin
Yeah.
Goldsmith wrote 2 episodes. Both were in season 4, or sorry, 5. He wrote What's in the Box and this. Though those were his only 2 credits, but he wasn't a new author. But yeah, I would say, Raymond, that given the fact that his first writing credit was episode uh 24 of season 5, it probably was a case where the author or they didn't necessarily get the Twilight Zone as much as a lot of earlier authors or a lot of earlier screenwriters.
I didn't mean to
No,
take
it's
up a lot of the episode to try to figure that out,
no, it's
but
okay.
I
Apologies.
know you guys have talked about that in last couple, and like some of these writers just didn't get what Twilight Zone was supposed to be, and you guys are 150 episodes into this shit at this point, and this stands out as a like maybe not Twilight Zone. Like let's just throw Magic Sword in there so it becomes Twilight Zone.
I think sometimes you try to. This is how I look at it. Sometimes you try to throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And I think the idea of this story is interesting and fascinating. I just don't think it's executed as highly as it could be. I honestly,
Agreed.
And it's like the Jeopardy room. I think it's an interesting idea for a Twilight Zone episode. Two people in this situation. Like nervous man in a $4 room or whatever. But it's a simple fact that like there is a je ne sais quoi or whatever you want to call it of what the Twilight Zone represents. That this episode kind of gets almost there, but then it has to go and do a 1960s um, thing where it
Like a
has to have the
revamp.
Japanese guy. Yeah, it has to have the Japanese guy say something that's very racist overtones of the 1960s, and I think I think early in the Twilight Zone, the Rod Serling and group were able to they were able to build a story into, let's say, a racist overtones or trying to deal with that scenario, but they were able to subtly put it in there and then kind of strike it when it needed to be. Here it's like, here's a guy who was in a war that killed a Japanese soldier that was unarmed, and he's saying racist things, and he's not saying racist. He's apologizing for those racist things, and he keeps going back and forth. And then you have this Japanese American guy who, has this secret, and he gets angry at it's just. It's going too hard too quickly. I know I'm doing the thrusty motion, but Jacob, I'm surprised you didn't say anything about that. But it's
Cut
just,
me off.
I feel like it's trying too hard to tell a story about two men who have dealt with both sides of the war and what that brings out of us, and then it throws a magical sword in there. It's just it is a Twilight Zone-esque episode, but it just doesn't do it very well. Is my how I look at it.
The
I guess
sword.
I don't know if that works, Raymond.
So one other thing looking at the companion, let's see what's his name. Robert Butler, the guy that directed this. So the writer Goldsmith recalls the troubles began with the director reading the script. He was a young guy and he was quite unhappy with the whole thing. He didn't like it, he didn't understand it. He told Frong, the producer, that he would have great difficulty directing it. So I said to Frong, "Look, you're going to need a director. I'll direct it." Then Frank says, "No, we have to pay this guy, whether he does the job or not." Goldsmith was out of the country when Encounter aired, so he never saw it. But he notes, "I started getting strange letters from people that had seen it. They saw a lot of existentialism in it and things of that nature." So the idea of an existential crisis within it, or existentialism within it, was something that they noticed even then,
Yeah, and
which Jake
Robert
covered a lot
Butler.
of there. So
Right. Robert Butler is actually pretty well known. He directed pilots. I think he actually, if I read this right, he directed the pilot for Star Trek, the original pilot, I think, if I'm reading that
really,
right. When did Star Trek come? Was it?
63 or
Yeah,
66?
well, he directed the Cage pilot, the one with Pike, and the Menagerie episodes and other stuff. I mean, he's directed a lot of stuff. Anyways, my point being, I get why you would feel the way you do. You said Robert Butler was uncomfortable with it. Is that
Yeah,
what
he
I'm
said
hearing
that it
right?
was he didn't know, he didn't like the, or he didn't understand it. He wasn't sure how to direct it.
Which is
Take the
you can
supernatural sword shit out. That's how.
yeah. But you can see that when you watch the episode that it feels very conflicted with what it's trying to say and what it's trying to do. And then once again, I can only imagine a guy going into a series like this or a story like this going, I'm just a guy here to direct a Twilight Zone episode. How the fuck do I direct an episode about two men who are confronting each other about a fucking war that, was basically about powers of people on both sides trying to, committing atrocities. And, it's like if you ever watch, what's that movie, Casualties of War with Michael J. Fox, it's the same shit. It's like, how do you do something like that? I don't know.
Him not understanding really comes through because it's like, who is the bad guy? And they keep switching. And like Fenton, modern day Fenton, he's calling them boys, calling by the wrong name. He's
Mhm.
not respecting his. But then it kind of turns out he's right. Like the guy does go by his Japanese name. He does speak Japanese. He does know what the sword said. So it goes both ways and it tries to meet in the middle and it just doesn't because this guy didn't know who the good guy was, who the bad guy was, and they just relied on, well, I guess the sword's the bad guy.
This story in 2000, today could be you know, guy who served in the Gulf War or in whatever World War II. Not World
I
War II,
saw
but
Pearl Harbor, and none of the Japanese Americans flagged in the Japanese. So Ben
yeah.
Affleck and Josh Hartnett would have shot him down if they'd done that.
Okay, so this is I just typed in what is or is there a conspiracy theory about Japanese Americans waving in Japanese planes during Pearl Harbor? The only thing that they said about it was there's something called the Pearl Harbor Advanced Knowledge conspiracy theory, which basically said that the US government had advanced knowledge that Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked. But there's nothing
Isn't that
about the
everything? Every
Yeah,
no,
they
time
that's
some
told us
true.
major
that.
tragedy
And
happens.
and the thing is
They knew.
there's probably a grain of truth to it because how many like warnings and watches and stuff do they get through intelligence at any one time? Like how many can you look at any one time? I mean, I don't know the answer, but I would imagine that there was probably when World War II started, there was probably a lot of these kind of, like warnings and such.
Yeah.
Well, the way we're going, that's not going to be a thing anymore. So,
Well,
I
that's not the
mean,
point.
yeah.
That's
All right.
Anyway.
Now that we're all back together again, Jacob, hit us with the closing narration
oh, oh my!
as you play with your toys. No, sir, I did not see you play with your dolls.
You see me playing with my dolls again? Oh wait. Two men in an attic, locked in mortal embrace. Their common bond and their common enemy, guilt. A disease all too prevalent amongst men, both in and out of the Twilight Zone. See, it is. It's about guilt.
That was like the weirdest kind of quick
No.
ending to a narration I've ever seen. Like it just like kind of just like bam.
So I
Yeah.
guess I do have something to say about this episode before we go.
Damn it, Jake. Son of a bitch.
No, like my final
You're off
thoughts
the
real quick.
podcast.
I don't think this episode was that bad. I think it had some issues, and it needed to. I think that it knew what it was trying to do, and I picked up on it. I think I did. I may be thinking too much into it, and I did like when it was successful in doing that and presenting, two gray area humans that are dealing with guilt about one thing or the other. I just think that there were like key points, and they weren't even a lot of them, but they were major key points where the execution just went off the rails. And I feel as if it was because they were struggling with the Twilight Zoneness of it all. It's like they had to shoehorn in this fucking sword, which they could have had the sword there. I think the sword would have been a good plot device to kind of coerce these things out of them, but not necessarily in a supernatural way. Like I said earlier, it could have been ambiguous enough for us to wonder, do you think the sword was doing something or it was just bringing up feelings in them? That whole in your face supernatural or whatever, the Twilight Zoniness of it, kind of oddly enough, trying to be Twilight Zone ruined the Twilight Zone episode.
I said the same thing, and I asked Triv to look up for me whether this was a Twilight Zone episode, basically. And I think that's what makes it a bad episode. I'm sorry, but
I mean,
we are watching the Twilight Zone. We're not watching random short films. We're not. We're watching this as a Twilight Zone episode, and as a Twilight Zone episode, it's not a good example of the show. It's just not. And they just said, "Oh, Twilight Zone at 10," and so I give it a low rating for that reason. If this was shortfilms.com on YouTube, then fine, it's a fine show. But as a Twilight Zone episode, it's not a good Twilight Zone episode because it wasn't meant to be a Twilight Zone.
yeah, I agree to a degree. I think that they went too overboard with trying to compensate with it being a Twilight Zone episode, and like I said, that is what ruined it. I think it still could have come across as a Twilight Zone episode with that more ambiguous side to it, but they just, I don't know. It's like they felt the need to like really shove it down our throats, and we didn't need that. It actually just made it. I'm not going to say less Twilight Zone, but it just made it less appealing. It could have been done as a two-man stage play and been extremely successful.
From a 2025 perspective, I can't say that I feel like this deserves to be like banned, but I understand at the time that there was a lot of factors in the real world that affected that. But I think if you took away the banned nature of this, I think that it would have been just another Twilight Zone episode that would have been mid to low rank, in my opinion.
I think I agree. I think that it definitely is in that mid to lower mid, lower being negative, lower mid rank. I don't think it's like Trouble with Templeton levels or
Of
anything, but
course not.
I do think it is lower mid. But what's frustrating to me about this episode is that with subtle tweaks, and I know I've said this a bunch of times, but I think it could have been so much higher. Like the basic idea of it, had they just made some subtle changes here or there, this could have been such a more thought-provoking episode that would have really been so much more interesting and so much higher on the ranking for me. But I mean, me
Yeah.
personally, when we get into the ranking, I am going to be looking at that probably lower mid.
I mean, didn't we
Jay,
kind of have, and I know we talked about this with, I don't even remember what the episode was, where it's kind of, we've already seen this done, like whether it's through Jeopardy Room, whether it's through something like Quality of Mercy, where you get that, that other side of the equation.
I
I
think
don't
what you're
know.
talking about is what Nick had thrown out the idea of what if they had been transported in time or place or something like that to where they were in place of these other people or I guess one of them
Right.
themselves. We've seen
in,
that specifically or similar situations to that where people are like, put into different people's shoes that they have feelings about. Much
Yeah.
like the movie. The movie had the one with the
Oh
director
yeah,
guy who
yeah,
went and was put, I think, in all the different situations like the Jewish camp and the Vietnam and all that.
yeah.
Yeah, we've seen that kind of thing in Twilight Zone. I don't know if we've necessarily seen this exploration of guilt kind of
Fair
thing.
point. That is true. I
and
don't
me
think
and
we have.
Jacob talked about earlier that if the same person, if the person admitted their fault instead of Takei saying, "Nah, you're a fucking murderer," if he had admitted it, like Takei had admitted his dad being a traitor, if everybody had a voice, it would have been better instead of just trying to shoehorn a good guy in.
Yeah. I don't think that they were going for good guy or bad guy in this.
It's like
I agree.
shoehorned
I think
Supernatural.
it was very much a gray story and it was supposed to be gray. How many stories have you heard about guys coming away from any war? Take your pick.
And they
That
thought,
don't right, that don't talk about the things that they encountered because
Yeah.
it's one, it's a horrific memory. Two, it's like it hurts to discuss. It dredges up a billion different things. And guys generally didn't talk about emotions. They didn't go into those kind of feelings generally.
What's going on, everyone? At this point, I just want to make you aware we had issues with this episode when it came to the quality of it. We were having problems getting it working. It just, things did not go well, to be fairly honest. But I wanted to at least tell you guys, I put together the best I could with the episode. I do appreciate you guys always listening. As far as the rankings for this, because the rankings part was one of the most like messed up parts of the episode, we did put it at 107. We've done a couple episodes since then, recording wise, but we put it at 107, and it was an episode that was very talkative and very divisive when it came to what we thought about it. But thank you so much, as always, guys, for watching. Thank you to Raymond Smith, who came on to do the episode. You can find him at his channel at Raymond H. Smith. And, of course, Triv and Jacob, you can find, of course, at Trivial Theater. Jacob, of course, is Jacob Anders Reviews. Retro Jake XY for his gaming channel. But hopefully the next week will be much better. It was one of those things. But I do appreciate you guys watching. I hope you enjoyed what you got to hear. And we'll see you guys next week for Mr. Garrity in the Graves. Thank you, guys. Have a good night. Bye.
no shit, I felt violated. I was in bed most of the day.
I don't blame you. I think I would have.
You guys are giving me such good outtakes. I'm just gonna put Jacob. I'm just at the end. I'm just gonna put Jacob going. I feel violated.